I never wanted trouble with my homeowners association. When my wife and I purchased our dream home 3 years ago in Willow Creek Estates, we knew the neighborhood had strict rules. The manicured lawns, consistent exterior paint colors, and orderly mailboxes created a pleasant uniformity that kept property values high. I'm a civil engineer by trade, so I appreciate order and structure. My wife, a landscape architect, loved the well-maintained community aesthetics. We diligently read through the covenant agreement before signing, determined to be model residents. Enter Karen Whitfield, HOA president. I first met her at the Welcome Mixer the association hosted for new homeowners. She approached with a perfectly practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "So wonderful to have professionals moving into our community," she said, scanning my wife and me with an appraising look. "I'm sure you'll have no trouble following our guidelines. We pride ourselves on maintaining standards here." Her tone was pleasant, but something in her delivery felt like a veiled warning. For the first year, everything was fine. We maintained our property meticulously, always submitted proper forms for any exterior changes, and paid our dues on time. I even volunteered to help with the community garden project, lending my engineering skills to design an efficient irrigation system. Karen seemed pleased with our contributions, often using us as examples of ideal community members during monthly meetings. The trouble began when I inherited 5 additional acres that bordered my backyard from my uncle. The land was undeveloped, mostly natural woodland with a small creek running through it. It wasn't part of the HOA territory, which ended at my original property line. I had plans to create a nature preserve, maybe add some walking trails for private use. Nothing that would affect the neighborhood aesthetics or violate any HOA rules. When Karen learned about my newly acquired land, something changed in her demeanor. "You know, the association has been looking to expand," she mentioned casually in neighborhood barbecue. "That land would be perfect for additional homes, maybe a community pool." I politely explained my plans for keeping it natural, emphasizing that the land wasn't subject to HOA governance. Her smile tightened. "We'll see about that." 2 weeks later, I received a certified letter claiming my new property was visually inconsistent with community standards and demanding I present a development plan to the board. I consulted my lawyer friend, who confirmed what I already knew. The HOA had zero jurisdiction over my inherited land. I drafted a polite but firm response stating this fact and thought that would be the end of it. It was only the beginning. Shortly after, I noticed unusual activity near the border of my properties. Workers in unmarked vans were conducting what looked like geological surveys. When I approached them, they claimed to be working for the county, checking water table levels. Something fell off, but I had a major project deadline at work and couldn't investigate further immediately. 3 days later, I returned home early from work feeling under the weather and heard machinery operating in my woods. I followed the noise to find a small drilling operation underway. 3 men were operating equipment that was unmistakably taking core samples from my land. "Excuse me," I called out, "this is private property. What's going on here?" The crew leader approached, clipboard in hand. "We have authorization from the Willow Creek Estates HOA for resource exploration." He showed me paperwork with Karen's signature at the bottom. I informed him that the HOA had no authority over this land and that they were trespassing. The workers looked confused but agreed to pack up while I sorted out the misunderstanding. I called Karen immediately. "There seems to be some confusion," I said, keeping my voice level. "There's a drilling crew on my new property claiming HOA authorization." "Oh yes," she replied airily, as if we were discussing something as trivial as mailbox colors. The board voted to approve preliminary exploration. We have reason to believe there might be valuable resources under that land. As community president, it's my duty to investigate opportunities that could benefit all residents. I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay professional. "Karen, that land is not under HOA jurisdiction. You have no legal right to authorize any activity there." "Actually," she countered with a smugness that made my blood pressure rise, "we've filed for annexation of all adjacent properties. It's just a matter of time before it goes through. We're simply being proactive." I ended the call before saying something I'd regret and contacted my lawyer friend again. He confirmed that any annexation would require my consent as the property owner, which I certainly hadn't given. He suggested sending a cease and desist letter, which we drafted immediately. The next morning, I took a day off work to walk my entire property line. What I found was shocking. There were at least a dozen small drill sites scattered throughout my woodland. Some had markers with coordinates, others with small flags labeled P1 through P12. At one site, I discovered an abandoned soil analysis report that mentioned promising hydrocarbon indicators. They weren't looking for water. They were prospecting for oil. The realization hit me like a truck. Karen wasn't interested in annexing my land for community aesthetics or additional housing. She believed there was oil under my property and wanted the HOA to control those potential profits. I took photos of everything, documented GPS coordinates of each drill site, and collected any paperwork left behind. I scheduled an emergency meeting with a proper environmental attorney this time, one specializing in property rights and resource disputes. Victoria Sanderson listened carefully to my story, examined my evidence, and shook her head in disbelief. "This is blatantly illegal on multiple fronts," she explained. "Unauthorized drilling, trespassing, potential environmental violations, and if they actually found anything, attempted theft of resources." Victoria recommended an aggressive approach. File for an immediate injunction against the HOA, report the unauthorized drilling to the County Environmental Protection Office, and consider pursuing damages. In the meantime, she advised, you need to secure your property and document any further incursions. That evening, I installed trail cameras at strategic points around my property line and ordered no trespassing signs to be placed every 50 feet along the border. I also hired a security company to conduct random patrols for the next 2 weeks. These measures were expensive, but worth it for peace of mind. 3 days later, my phone buzzed with alerts from the trail cameras. Karen herself was on my property with 2 men carrying equipment. I saved the footage, called the police to report trespassers, and drove home immediately. By the time I arrived, a patrol car was already there. I showed the officer my property deed, the trail camera footage, and explained the situation. The officer approached Karen, who was now standing at the edge of my lawn, arms crossed defensively. "Ma'am, you're trespassing on private property. The owner has asked you to leave." Karen launched into an impressive display of indignation. "Officer, there's clearly been a misunderstanding. As HOA president, I have every right to inspect properties within our jurisdiction for compliance. This property isn't within your jurisdiction," I interjected calmly, handing the officer copies of my land deed and property survey. "And those men with you aren't inspecting for lawn height or fence colors. They're conducting unauthorized resource exploration." Karen's face flushed red. "We are simply conducting community improvement assessments. This area has been designated for potential expansion of neighborhood amenities." The officer, to his credit, remained professional. "Regardless of your intentions, ma'am, this is private property. You need to leave now, or I'll have to cite you for trespassing." Karen left with a barrage of threats about lawyers and HOA bylaws, but I noticed she seemed more flustered than confident. The officer advised me to proceed with the legal actions my attorney had recommended and to call immediately if Karen or her associates returned. That evening, I received multiple calls from concerned neighbors. Apparently, Karen had sent an emergency HOA email blast claiming I was obstructing community improvement projects and potential revenue streams that would benefit all homeowners. She called for an emergency meeting to discuss appropriate measures to protect association interests. I forwarded the email to Victoria, who responded immediately. "This is perfect. She's documenting her illegal intentions." The emergency meeting was scheduled for the following evening, and Victoria suggested I attend with her to present my side. The community center was packed with curious homeowners when we arrived. Karen stood at the front, flanked by 2 board members who always supported her initiatives. Her expression when she saw me enter with Victoria was priceless, a mixture of surprise and poorly concealed anxiety. Since the subject of tonight's discussion appears to be my property, I said calmly as I approached the front, I thought it appropriate to attend. This is my attorney, Victoria Sanderson, who specializes in property rights. Karen attempted to regain control. This is a closed board meeting. Actually, interrupted Mrs. Jenkins, a retired judge and long-standing community member. The bylaws clearly state that any meeting regarding specific property disputes must include the property owner. I believe we should hear what he has to say. Victoria and I presented our case methodically, showing photos of the drill sites, copies of the soil analysis mentioning hydrocarbons, and maps of my property clearly showing it was outside HOA boundaries. Then Victoria outlined the potential legal consequences: unauthorized drilling, trespassing, environmental code violations, and attempted theft of resources. These actions could result in significant financial penalties for the HOA as an entity, meaning costs would be distributed among all members. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Nobody liked the idea of their dues increasing to cover Karen's legal mistakes. Furthermore, Victoria continued, board members who knowingly authorized illegal activities could face personal liability, as this would constitute a breach of fiduciary duty. The color drained from the faces of the two board members standing beside Karen. One of them, Ted Williams, cleared his throat. I think we need to clarify that the full board never authorized any drilling or exploration activities. Karen looked betrayed. We discussed community expansion plans into land we don't own or control, Ted interrupted. You told us you were merely conducting preliminary surveys with owner permission. There was never any board vote approving drilling or resource exploration. The meeting dissolved into chaos after that, with Karen attempting to defend her actions while other board members distanced themselves. Eventually, Mrs. Jenkins called for order and proposed an emergency vote to suspend Karen from her position pending a full investigation. The motion passed unanimously, except for Karen's own vote. The following week was intense. The County Environmental Office conducted a thorough investigation of the drill sites and found multiple violations. The drilling company Karen had hired came forward with emails showing she had misrepresented herself as having full authority over my land. 3 other board members resigned, claiming they had been misled about the nature and legality of the community expansion project. But the most damning evidence came from Karen's own computer. As part of the investigation, her HOA emails were subpoenaed, revealing she had been in talks with a small energy company about revenue-sharing opportunities if oil was discovered. She had apparently promised them access to nearly 200 acres of prime, undeveloped land, my 5 acres plus neighboring properties she intended to annex through HOA maneuvering. While the legal proceedings continued, I had a practical problem: dozens of unsealed drill holes throughout my woodland. Some are already causing erosion issues near the creek. My environmental attorney connected me with a remediation specialist who recommended filling the holes with cement to prevent further damage. I decided to handle it personally. Over a long weekend, I rented equipment and methodically filled every single hole with cement, adding small markers to document their locations for the ongoing investigation. It was exhausting work, but oddly satisfying. Each plug of cement felt like a physical rejection of Karen's overreach. The legal consequences for Karen came swiftly. The HOA permanently removed her from the board and voted to cover my legal expenses as part of their settlement. The environmental violations resulted in substantial personal fines for Karen. The energy company she'd been negotiating with backed out completely and issued a public statement distancing themselves from her actions. But the most fitting consequence came from Karen's workplace. As a real estate agent specializing in exclusive planned communities, her professional reputation was built on understanding property laws and homeowner regulations. When news of the illegal drilling scheme made its way through local professional circles, her brokerage firm placed her on indefinite leave pending their own investigation. At the next HOA meeting with a newly elected board in place, I was surprised to receive an official apology from the association and an offer to purchase my woodland at a generous price for actual community use. A genuine nature preserve with public walking trails, maintained by HOA funds, but owned by a land trust to prevent future exploitation. I agreed to consider the offer, with conditions ensuring the land would remain undeveloped and environmentally protected. It seemed like a positive outcome from an ugly situation. As for Karen, I see her occasionally at the local grocery store. She avoids eye contact and changes aisles when she notices me. I heard she's trying to sell her house, but potential buyers keep backing out when they Google her name and find news stories about the illegal drilling scheme. Last week, I was finalizing plans with the conservation group that will help manage the nature preserve when Mrs. Jenkins mentioned that Karen had applied for a position on the new HOA Architectural Review Committee. "Don't worry," she said with a wink. The application was denied. Unanimously. Sometimes I walk through my woodland, following the creek's gentle curve, and spot those cement plugs peeking through the underbrush. They're oddly comforting reminders that standing your ground matters, that knowledge and preparation trump entitlement and deception, and that sometimes the best revenge is simply enforcing the boundaries that were there all along. The new HOA board has become a model of transparency and proper governance. They've even invited me to share my experience at a regional conference for homeowner associations titled Property Rights and Boundaries, Legal and Ethical Considerations for Community Management. I'm considering it. After all, my cement-filled drill holes have made me something of an expert on establishing firm boundaries.